This lesson is Create Class Properties in JavaScript. The objectives for this lesson are to create private field variables, implement write-only properties, implement read-only properties, implement read-write properties, create private methods in the class, and become familiar with the optional chaining operator. Let's take a look at creating class fields in JavaScript. Now, a field are private variables within the class. You declare them with a pound sign in front of the name. As you can see here, pound sign class name, pound sign release date. It's scoped to within the class body only, so it has local scope within the class itself. They cannot be read from or written to from outside the class. Let's take a look at creating class fields in JavaScript. In this HTML file, down here in the script, I have a class starting on line 32 called movie. I have some public instance properties, so film ID, name, genres, actors. Then on line 42, I've created a private field definitions. These fields are identified with a pound or a hash sign before them, so like pound sign release date. Then I've got a constructor that you pass in some parameters to that you then use to set the public properties. And again, I didn't have to create the ones on lines 34 through 37 because doing it in the constructor would do it as well. But I wanted to show you that if you want to create them, and I kind of like this because it really identifies what is a public property. So then in the constructor, I'm assigning to those. And then on line 53, I'm going to initialize this dot pound release date. But then, down here in this method, getMovieInfo, I'm going to go ahead and print out on the window, the console window, the private release date, because I can access it from here within the class. And then I'll return the other information. Now, down here on line 66, I create a new instance of this movie class. I then call the getMovieInfo, so it'll print out the release date. And then on line 75, I'm trying to access the release date. It's going to come back as undefined, because it's private to the class. Let's go ahead and run this. And we'll take a look at our window here. And you can see now there's that private release date spit out there on the console window when I called getMovieInfo. And then you can see when I tried to access it from outside of the class block, it comes back as undefined, as we'd expect. Now, why might you use a private field like that inside of a class? Well, maybe you want to control access to that particular variable. To do this, we use the get and set keywords to selectively provide access to fields. So you can see here in this little code snippet I've got, get release date, return this dot pound sign release date. Now remember, this is going to go inside of the movie class, so I have access to the release date, and I'm using a property getter to return that information. Or I'm going to use a property setter, so set release date, pass in a value, so I can use that to assign a value to that private field. So we use set only to create a write only property. We would use get only to create a read only property. And we use both if we want to run some code when the property is read or written. Let's take a look at creating a write only property in JavaScript first. In this HTML file, down here in the script, I've started my class movie on line 26. I have my 4 public properties. I have my private field pound release date. In the constructor, I'm not setting the release date, so it's just undefined right now. You'll notice then on lines 51 through 53, I have a setter. Set space release date. I keep it the same name as what my field name is. Passing in a value. So that parameter coming in is going to be what we put on the right-hand side of an equal sign. That value gets passed into this value parameter, which we then use to assign to that private field. So if we come down here, you can see on line 62, let movie equals new movie, passing in those values. I can do a getMovieInfo. Then on line 71, I can do a movie.release date and set a value, 1974-12-15, for instance. Then if I do the getMovieInfo again, we'll see that release date is now going to appear in the console window. Now, if we look at trying to do a movie.release date, as you can see here on line 80, we're trying to access a getter. There is no getter for this, and it's a private field inside of the class, so this will give us an undefined. So let's go ahead and run this. We'll open up our console window. So in the first one, we don't see anything in the release date because remember it was undefined. But then I've done the set on release date to set the value so you can see it now here, 1974-12-15. But again, if I try to access release date, I'm not going to get anything because there's no getter in this particular class. Let's now take a look at creating a read-only property in JavaScript. In this HTML, I have the same class movie, same public properties. I have the pound release date. This time in the constructor, I'm going to go ahead and initialize that release date. And this time, as you can see on lines 53 to 55, I'm using the get. So I'm creating a property getter to return this pound release date. I have also taken out the release date printing in that getMovieInfo method. So now down here, I create the instance of the movie class on line 64. I then print out the results from the getMovieInfo method. Then I can use the property getter whenever I access movie.releaseDate. So now it will return that into the console window on line 72. And then down on line 77, I'm going to attempt to set that. Well, if I don't have a setter, I'm going to get an exception on this line 77. So let's go ahead and run this. We'll open up our console window. So now you can see in the console window that I am getting that release date because I had that public getter. But when I try to do the setter, it's telling me it's type error. I can't set the property release date, which only has a getter. So it's actually a pretty good error message telling you that, hey, you got a getter, but you don't have a setter. And just to finish this off, let's go ahead and create read and write properties in our JavaScript class. In this HTML file down here in the script, I've got my class movie with our 4 public properties, our pound release date private field. I've now added in the constructor, as you can see on line 41, I've added an additional parameter coming in to be able to set that private field for the release date. Then on lines 52 through 57, you can see I have both a getter and a setter now. So now down here, when I create an instance of the movie, I can go ahead and set the release date on line 73, and I can also display the release date property on line 76 because I have both a getter and a setter. Now in a class, we can also have private class methods. These methods can be declared private by, again, placing a pound sign in front of the method name. So these methods then can only be called from other methods within the class itself. You can't access them through an instance variable. But they could do things like calculate a profit. If you had a price and a cost properties inside of your class, you might assign the result of price minus cost to a profit property. So let's take a look at creating private class methods in JavaScript. In this HTML down here in the script, I'm creating a new class called Product. I have 3 public properties, product ID, name, and profit. I have 2 private field definitions, pound cost, pound price. In the constructor, I'm having 4 parameters come in, the ID, the name, the cost, and the price. I'm then going to set the properties of cost and price equal to either cost or 0 if it comes in nullish, price to either price or 0 if it comes in nullish. Now, I want you to notice that I'm not doing pound sign cost or pound sign price here on lines 48 and 49. What I'm doing is I'm calling the setters. So I'm setting the cost on line 56 to set cost, passing in the value. I'm setting value into the pound cost. And then I'm going to call this calculate profit method to recalculate the profit. So if we go down here, we take a look on lines 79 through 83, calculate profit is a private method because it has that pound or that hash sign in front of the method name. Then what we're going to do is check this dot price, make sure it's a valid value or it's 0 minus the cost. If it's a valid value, the result of that expression is going to go into the public property profit. Then going back up here to line 65, notice when I set the price, I set the value into this pound sign price, but then I again also call recalculate the profit. So both the set for cost and the set for price, when they get a new value, that profit is always going to be updated. So if we come down here, line 88, we create a new instance of our product class. I can do a prod.getProductInfo. I've passed in 100 and 300 as the cost and the price. So if I then report on that get product information, the profit is already going to be there because when we set the 100 and the 300, it called that method. If I then force a recalculation of the profit by setting prod.cost equals 200, if I then call get product info again, it's now going to have that new profit in there because again, when I call the setter for cost, it's going to recalculate the profit. So let's take a look at this. Let's run it. Bring up our console window. So you can see that 2 times it went in the calculate profit method because in the constructor, I set the price and the cost based on the values coming in that I passed into the constructor. And remember, it was 100 and 300. You can see that here. And the profit then is 200. Then I set the cost equal to 200, which forces that recalculation. And now you can see that the profit is now 100 because the cost is 200 and the price is 300. Let's talk about the optional chaining operator in JavaScript. Now this ensures that an object's property or function exists prior to calling it. So this avoids runtime errors. The symbol for this operator is a question mark followed by a period placed after the name of a property or method that may not exist. So I've got a couple of examples here. Person.pet.cat. If we don't think cat is going to exist, use the question mark period, and then it'll stop there if it doesn't find cat, and it'll just report an undefined. It won't error. Same thing with a method. If I've got a person info method that I think may or may not be there, question mark dot afterwards, and then open close parenthesis. If it's there, it'll return whatever that method is going to return. But if it's not there, it'll return undefined. Let's take a look at the optional chaining operator in JavaScript. In this HTML file, I'm creating a class called person. It has a person ID and a name property, and it has a pet property that itself is another property called dog, and under that, another property called name. In the constructor, I'm passing in the ID, the name, and the dog name. So I set this.personID equal to ID, this.name equal name, this.pet.dog.name equal to the dog name passed in the constructor. So let's take a look. If I create an instance of a person class, so let person1 equals new person, passing in a 1 and Joe Smith and Rover. If I put person1 out into the console window, we'll see all the properties, but I'm also then going to spit out the person1.pet.dog.name. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to let person2 equal new person, passing in an ID like 1 and then Jane Doe. We'll spit that out on the console as well, but look what I'm now trying to do. I'm going to try to attempt to report back on person2.pet.cat.name. Well, cat doesn't exist. Okay, so what happens if I run this right now, we're going to see that I get an uncaught type error. Cannot read properties of undefined name, right? Because it couldn't find cat, but it couldn't find name under cat. So it said, well, I got some sort of type error. And if we take a look here, you can see that under pet, there is no cat. Instead of that, if we know something may or may not exist, let's use our question mark dot. So on line 67 here, I'm going to do person2.pet.cat is the thing I'm not sure is going to be there. So I'm going to use that question mark dot and then try to access the whatever property after that. Same thing with methods. On line 74, if I try to access person1.personInfo, question mark dot, open close parentheses says look for a method called personInfo. I'm not sure it's going to be there. If it's not there, return an undefined. If it is there, go ahead and run it and report back whatever it's supposed to return. So let's go ahead and save this. We'll now run. Bring up our console window. Now everything works. The program continues on. We're getting undefined, which may cause other errors, but at least you could test for that and check to see if that one was undefined. And if so, you could then take some other logic. But the optional chaining method at least lets you continue on. In this lesson, we established read-only properties. We implemented write-only properties. We defined private field variables. We called a private method within the class. And we acquired knowledge on that optional chaining operator. Coming up next, understand class inheritance in JavaScript.